Hi, my name is Jeremy Schulman. You can find me on Twitter as Network Automaniac. And today what I'd like to do is show you my process for learning a new API for a network automation system and the things that I look for and what I consider a good approach to an API. And today what I'm going to do is showcase a product called Ipython. I do not work for Ipython, but I am using an evaluation copy here. And it comes with a very large data set for me to kind of play around with. And so what Ipython does is it runs a snapshot of your network, which means it goes out to connect to all your devices and runs a bunch of show commands to collect data like your configuration and all your operational state data. And it parses all that data and stores it into its database. And then it runs audit checks against that data. It comes with a ton of built-in audit checks, and you can define your own. But you can see on the dashboard, this is kind of what it comes with off the truck. It does a ton of protocol stuff, a ton of inventory management kind of things, management connectivity things. And what I'm going to do is show a couple areas of their product and how I use it, but more importantly, like how I use it with the API. So kind of the first area that I look at is the devices, and this is essentially all of the devices in the snapshot. These are all your devices in your network, and you can see that it collects the host name. You can organize your devices into sites, collects the serial number, the IP address management, the uptime, the vendor, the vendor family, the platform, the model, and the version. So this is really what we would call like Ansible facts for a device. So it does that all for me. And I can sort and I can filter this data. And then the audits, you can see like for the devices, these are the audits that came in off the truck. So here's one for device time, and you can see that they have one that says, show me all the devices that have been up for less than 1 day. And if you were to click that, it would automatically filter that. And then there are some other areas that I find pretty interesting, like the connectivity data, the CDP LDP data. If I wanted to know the connectivity matrix for my devices, maybe I want to capture that data and put it into Netbox. It has all that kind of information in here. So, how would I learn to use their API, right? So going to their API page right here. The first thing that I look for is, what is the route that I use to get to their API? So you can see, right up front, this is, the route. It's the host name or IP address followed by API v1 and the endpoint. And then anytime you do a command, you're going to get an HTTP response code. So they explain, which response codes that they'll return back and their meaning. And then, the first thing that you need to do is authenticate to an API. So they talk about their authentication process. They support both basic auth and token-based auth. I'm going to use token-based auth in today's example. But it explains, how to do each of those processes. For example, for the token auth, they use the authorization header, and they use the bearer token style. So the word bearer followed by the token. They explain a little bit more about their token usage. They use JSON Web Tokens. Tokens are only good for 30 minutes, which means this video will last less than 30 minutes. And then they talk about a refresh process. So they have a refresh token process. And they go into some nice details to explain how you would authenticate to the API and handle an expired token, which is great. And then any API response that has an error, they have this data structure where they'll explain what the error is and what their codes mean. And so the first thing is here's how you authenticate, right? You post to auth login, and you give it your username, password, and it will return back some tokens. So let's go do that. I am going to start with a brand new environment. So I will start out with a virtualized environment. And we'll get that going. And let's upgrade pip so it doesn't, complain at me. And let's install Httpx. I like using Httpx as a replacement for requests. It looks and feels mostly the same, but it supports both async and synchronous calls. And then I'm going to install Ipython because I like using the interactive Python for my demos. All right, and let's launch right into Ipython. All right, so we're going to do from Httpx import client because what I want to do is create an API client to IP Fabric. And by creating a client session, I can save our header values, in particular our token, but it also has this really nice feature called base URL. So I don't have to type in the complete URL all the time. And I know that I need to do API/v1 because that was up here at the top of these docs, right? And so I'll do that, and then I'll say verify is false because I don't want to deal with SSL. And now let's do our authorization. So I will do a post to that endpoint. So API post to that endpoint, and the JSON payload will be username is Jeremy, and the password is Jeremy12345 because it is. All right. And then I got a good response. So I will get the response payload into the body. And then I can see I have this access token. So now that I have that access token, what I need to do is in my headers, I need to set that into the bearer token. So I would say authorization is equal to bearer plus, and now I want my body access token. And if I look at my headers, I can see that I have an authorization. Httpx actually shows it as secure, but if I wanted to see what it looked like, I could display it here. So that's what a token looks like. And now we are ready to get going with our API. So if we kind of scroll down to after the API element, we can see that if I wanted to get data out of these tables, like the device inventory, it says we can click on the question mark button in the header of the table, and it will show us API documentation. And there's this video here that if I click on, it will show us an example of that, right? So it's showing you essentially all the API docs and the fields and what the API call looks like for the page that you're on, for the data that you're looking on. And I call this in situ API documentation, meaning it's showing you the API call that would achieve the outcome that you see on the screen. And I think that's a really great approach. I like that very much. So we're going to see that happen in real time here. Then their page tells us what the primary keys are for the request payload. So we're going to go through each of these in more detail. There's a snapshot, which is, identifies the collection of data that you want to look at. And the product supports, the ability to snapshot many instances of your network over time. Columns is the columns of the table that you want returned. So maybe you only want a few of those columns returned. Filters allows you to specify what data you want, pulled back from the API. So you can filter your requests. You can paginate the data so that you can either pull out all of the records from a table or just some of them. And in each of these instances, they give you little examples to show you what these values would look like. For example, here's a filter that says, I want to pull back, in this case, it looks like records that are a family of type Cisco, and the host name could be either equal to one of these two values. So they kind of have this expressive filtering mechanism. They provide a sorting capability, so you can sort the data as it comes back. And then if you want the audit reports for a given table to be returned, you specify the reports key. And here it shows you how to interpret the results of the report. So the colors have specific numeric values, like 0 is green and blue is 10 and yellow is 20 and red is 30. So why don't we give that a shot and see what this looks like. I'm going to go to the devices page. So this is all of our inventory, we can see we have 647 devices in total. And this is kind of the audit reports that are built into the product off the shelf, so to speak. So we'll explore those in a sec. But here you can see that the devices inventory table contains your host name. You can organize devices into site, the serial number, the management IP address, the device uptime, the vendor, the family of the operating system, the platform, the model, and the version. So, what we would normally call Ansible facts, IP Fabric collects from the network, presents to you in a very nice, event neutral form. And if I wanted to get this exact page of data, I could click the question mark. And here it's showing me this is the payload that I would provide to this API endpoint. Okay, so let's do that. I have an API and my base URL already ends in /v1. So I'm just going to take this part of the URL. So I'll copy that like so. And then for each of these, I'd like to copy and paste this, but this is not yet like in a JSON copyable form. So I'm going to do a little trick here real quick. I'm just going to say columns is equal to columns, filters is equal to filters, and this way I can copy and paste it here. So pagination is pagination, snapshot is snapshot, sort is sort, and reports is report. So I've asked them to kind of maybe fix that. That would be great. So I can just copy and paste this normally. Okay, so I'm going to make a request body. And so here we can see I have a request body. These are the columns that I want returned back to me. If I wanted to change that, I could. I'm not filtering the table. Pagination says, give me 15 records starting at record location 0. Normally, I delete the pagination field, so I get all the records back. And this is saying, give me the report data. So if I wanted to run this, I would say API post URL, and then the JSON data is this request. All right, and I see that I got a good response. So I'll get my data back from JSON. And now I want to see, well, what did the API give me? So I see I've got 2 keys. The API documentation didn't talk about this, but it says here I've got 2 keys. So let's first look at what is meta. So meta is telling me information about the data that I pulled back. So it says that, I asked for a pagination of limit of 15 start at 0. And it said it's given me back 15 records. And then it also tells me that the total count is 647. And if I look at the data, so if I said body data, and this is like 1 record of the data. So I'm just looking at the first record. And you can see here that I've got the column names for my table. But in some cases, you can see that I've got a record of data for that column. And this is the report data. Remember, the severity number associates to the color. So this is, this particular one would be colored red for uptime, and this one would be colored green for hostname. So I'm going to change the request body in a couple ways. I'm going to first get rid of the pagination so I get all my records. That's how you just get all your records. And if I want to delete the reports, so I don't really want the audit data, I'll just remove that key. So if I go back and re-execute my command, I can get my data, and I could say records is equal to data. And if I look at the first record, now you can see I have a flat kind of key value pair, right? And the reason why I have this flat key value pair is because I removed the reports field from the request. Okay, so let's say I wanted to, filter this data. For example, let's say I wanted to filter the data by model, and I type in CSR here. And so you can see that it's filtered the data, and it's using kind of a contains in, filtering capability. So if I click on a question mark, I can see, sure enough, there's a filter here that says the model, and they have an operator, they call it like, and it's CSR. And if I made it equal to, you can see there's no value because in this case, the operator is different. That's an exact match operator. And they support a whole bunch of different operators. You know, they can even do regular expressions. But what's nice is, you know, I can basically type something in and then take that value, for example, just like it is, and go change my filters, and then rerun my request, and look at the body. And we know we can do this. So I can see that I have 13 records. And I can see, sure enough, I have 13 records. And if I wanted to look at, you know, the first record, you know, I can see that it in fact matches that. But what if you wanted to do something a little bit more advanced? Like you wanted to have, you know, a combination of things. For example, let's say I wanted to pull back all the platforms that were, you know, say Palo Alto and that particular model for whatever reason. We could use this advanced filter, and I could say I want the vendor. Let me go find vendor is equal to Palo Alto. And if you wanted to try it out as you go, you can just click filter and you can see, oh, here's some Palo Alto. But let's say I wanted to add something else. Let's say I want Palo Alto, or I want the model to be contains CSR. So here you can see, you know, I have kind of more of an advanced filter. And if I wanted to see what that filter looked like, again, I'd hit the question mark. And you can see this advanced filter is a little bit more compound, if you will. There's ors and ands, or there's ors here, sorry. So I could change this to filters is equal to that. So you can see that there's like an or statement. You know, these are the criteria. I can re-execute the command and get the body and look at the meta. And in this case, I have 18 records. And sure enough, that matches up. And if I wanted to look at those, I could see that I have CSR here down at the bottom. And if I scroll up at the top, since it's sorted by model, here's the Palo Altos. So again, you know, I can in situ play with the UI and then click a button to see exactly the API call that I would need to make. So that's a pretty neat example. Now, if I wanted to get the report data, like let's say I wanted to get the results of this device uptime, and I clicked on this here, I can see that there are 34 devices that have a device uptime with less than 1 day. I could actually look at what that filter looks like. So I could click on red and you can see that there's a rule that says uptime is less than 1 day. And I can click on the question mark to see, well, what does that look like? So I'm going to just copy all of this as it is. And then again, re-execute my API call. And look at the meta. And sure enough, I've got 34 devices, and since the limit was set to 15, I only got 15 back. And if I wanted to look at one of the data records, I can see that the severity is 30. And if I took this number, which is minutes, and divided by 60, I can see that it's 27 minutes, which matches up here. So, you know, through the API, I can get the tabular data or I could get the audit results data, you know, fairly easy by just pulling the parameters out of this page. So that's a pretty, you know, common thing that I would do is, you know, if I wanted to populate a system like Netbox from the actual inventory of the network, this would be a way that I would do that. I'll show you another, you know, common thing that you might want to do. The system compiles the connectivity matrix. There's actually two ways to get that. You can get it here from the connectivity matrix, and this does both layer 2 and layer 3 connectivity, so that includes like the layer 3 connectivity protocols. But let's say I wanted to do CDP and LLDP. So just the physical, layer 2 connectivity. What's neat about this is it's gonna not only give me whether it's local, the local and remote information, but it also tells me whether or not the other endpoint is a network device or a host. And this is kind of interesting because part of what IP Fabric does is it will also collect all of the attached hosts, at least the IP addresses that it knows about. So if you were looking for a particular MAC address or an IP address, in your system, you would be able to, provide, here's your MAC address. Like say somebody said, hey, I'm looking for this MAC address, and you wanted to know what IP address, that it was associated to, and the device and interface for which it was associated to, this would be the exact API call that you would make. So, hey, let's try that, right? Let's take this URL. So I'm going to set my URL to that value. And then I'm going to take this and I'll say my request is this. So here you can see the filter says that MAC is like this value. And let's get the results. So API post URL JSON is request. Great. And should be, one record, right? We found one item. And if we look at the data, we can see information about, where it's connected to, the interface, the device, the host name, the interface. This is the interface name's description, lab content, I guess. But this is really great. If you're looking for, where is a particular host, given the IP address of the MAC. But going back to the LLDP CDP neighbor thing, if I only wanted to know my network connectivity, maybe I would just say network endpoint devices, and I would say managed here. So these are all the devices. And if I wanted to do this, say by given site, let's say I want to do MPLS. I've got the data that I want. They even have like a little button here. I can export this to CSV, but if I wanted, again, to get this by API, click this button, pull this out. This would be my request. Oops. So I guess we have to set true is equal to true, false is equal to false, because we'll do that. And then our URL is this value. And we'll get our response, API post URL, oops, request. Great. And we'll look at the meta. We can see we have 118, I'm sorry, 118. And if we look at just one of the elements, you can see, this is the record that we get back. And again, if we didn't want the severity, if we didn't want the audit reports, we would just, delete from the request the reports key. And then we would have the data without the, the data without the audit reporting built into it. So this is really nice. Again, this is a great way to find what are all of my CDP or my LDP neighbors that are network devices, because maybe you want to look at those links, maybe you want to monitor those links, and you don't want to do those, monitoring functions on links that are connected to end hosts, for example. So again, it's a really interactive UI, and it's a really interactive API from the point of view that I can, interact with the system and then see exactly the API call that I need to make. So hopefully this has been kind of a good overview of what I look for, in an API, the documentation, the methodology that I go through, and just a good example of a product that has a really great approach to APIs. If you have any questions, please put them, up under the video link, and hope you enjoyed. Thanks.